I'd seen a lot of other people having success with the proof of concept, and I have to say it was a very useful tool. I think you'll find that once you get on set, it's not so different from what you've been doing with your short films. It's just on a larger scale.
Bonus episode. I feel like there should be some sort of alarm. It's a bonus episode, and we're glad about it. Welcome. This is the Fright Club podcast, and she is Hope Madden.
He's George Wolf.
And we are from madwolf.com. And if you've heard any of these podcasts over the years, or a lot of them, you've heard us talk many times about the Nightmares Film Festival that we love so much in Columbus, Ohio. A fantastic festival of indie horror, shorts, features, comedy, really scary stuff, you name it. And we've been wanting for a while to record a live podcast during the festival, and we were never quite able to work it out. Well, we were able to work it out this year.
We get the chance to talk to Nightmares alum director Natalie James, who a couple of years back, she won Best Overall Short with her really wonderful film, Creswick. And then you may realize she went on this year to direct one of the best horror films of 2020, Relic.
Everything all right, Grant?
I thought this was where it got in.
Who?
Whoever it was coming into the house.
Mum, what is it?
It's here. Under the bed.
There's nothing under the bed, Mum.
Will you check for me?
I'm here to help you, Mum.
I can see you. This house seems unfamiliar.
So we get the opportunity to talk with her and to field some questions from some of the other attendees at the festival.
Yeah, you'll hear us get introduced. Really nice introduction by Jason Tostevan, who is the co-founder and lead programmer for Nightmares Film Festival. And then we just take it away with a nice conversation with Natalie James. So enjoy.
I'm going to start by saying I am super thrilled about this session. I'm really excited that it's our first Working Maker workshop for a couple of reasons. I'm a huge Natalie James fan from her short Creswick, and she knows that. I've told her. So I'm just thrilled to have her back in the Nightmares family. But before we get to Natalie, I want to mention, if you haven't met Hope and George before, Hope and George are a team called Mad Wolf of film critics who also run probably the smartest horror podcast happening right now. No offense to those of you who have your own podcasts. I'm sure they're very smart. But I'm a huge fan of Fright Club, which is their podcast. If you're not subscribed and watching and listening, because you can also watch when the pandemic hasn't shut us all down and they can get to Gateway Film Center, you absolutely should. But they're two of my favorite folks in horror, super smart, super kind, really good at what they do. And I'm just thrilled that they agreed to this sort of fireside-y chat style conversation with Natalie. So with that, my warm fuzzies out of the way, I'm going to turn it over to you guys, Hope and George, and to have your conversation with Natalie. Although I should say, folks, thank you for staying on mute. Hope and George will let you know if it's appropriate to come off mute, if they're going to open it up for questions. Otherwise, chat in your question. There's this chat function, and I'm going to watch that. So that won't sneak by. I'll watch that for everybody. And so if you have a question, I'll make sure they get to it. Cool? Okay, with that, it's yours.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. We are extremely excited to be back at Nightmares and to be hosting the first of these workshops with a filmmaker that we are big fans of as well. I remember back in 2017, we were on the jury panel for mainly the thriller features, but Jason he would throw random shorts to us. We're like, hey, check this out. And he sent us Creswick, and we were just knocked out as he was. And if you remember, the veterans remember that it won Best Overall Short. Yeah. So, and now the filmmaker is back with her feature from this year, Relic. Everybody, welcome Natalie Erica James to the workshop.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Oh, we're so glad to have you here.
I wanted to start in kind of a broad, I wanted to ask about your evolution as a filmmaker, because aside from Creswick, you've made another three other short films before making the leap to the feature. And I'm curious about if, you sort of learned with each film and to prepare yourself for a feature, or what the evolution looked like there?
I guess I had a pretty standard path into filmmaking in that the desire to be a filmmaker came as a teen. And so I went straight into film school right out of high school. So I guess at film school, it's the opportunity to make a lot of shit short films and try out a lot of ideas and make a lot of mistakes, of course. And one of the great things about film school is that you kind of have a community around you who will help you. And of course, you give back and help them on their shoots as well. But that really allows you to continue making films past film school. And so that's one of the things that I did. I worked a lot in advertising. That was kind of how I paid rent, anything from production assisting to directing. But I just made sure I was still making the really narrative films that were really important to me. So yeah, you learn a lot over the years. Some of your shorts are more successful than others. And there's always that heartbreak of like not getting into the festival you really want to get into and the ups and downs that come with that. But I think focusing on the stories that are really important to you and that there's like an urgency to those stories that you need to tell them, that's really important as well. So yeah, we'd definitely say I learned a lot over the shorts making process.
Did starting off in short films, was that a conscious decision to start the path to a feature? And you thought that maybe that would be a good way to get your feet wet, didn't feel you were ready right now for a feature film, and so you started with the shorts?
Yeah, I think, taking Relic as an example, we actually had the first draft of Relic when I made Creswick. So Creswick obviously functions as a proof of concept, but it was almost reverse engineered in that, we tried to come up with a succinct story. That's why the characters are different. It's more of a father-daughter story. But yeah, instead of trying to shoehorn a feature idea into a short, I think there's so many ways to do it. You could totally do the Whiplash thing of having just a single scene that sums up, your film. But for us, we wanted to, because it's so thematic, we wanted to kind of encapsulate the theme in just a much more shorter 10-minute kind of casing. And that seemed to work quite well, I think, because by the time we were going around to festivals with the short, we already had the feature. So inevitably, when you start to meet people and they like your short, you can kind of go, well, here's the feature version. And, what do you think about this? And I'd seen a lot of success, like other people having success with the proof of concept. And I have to say, it was a very useful tool in marketing, or at least selling the film and the idea, because you could go into a meeting having someone already seen your short and really understanding the tone and the atmosphere, everything that you wanted to convey. So instead of having to like vocalize it, you could just point to this really, this thing that you'd already made. So it's helpful.
You've also, you worked on a lot of other people's films over the years, including Upgrade. I know you worked on that film and some other things. So I was curious,
right?
Do you ever watch sort of other directors and think, I'm going to steal that? Or do you ever watch other directors and think, no, that's not how I would do that. They should be doing it this way.
Yeah, so Upgrade was part of a program that the Australian government runs, which they call it a director's attachment, which essentially means you just follow a director around for 3 months. So I was just literally observing Lee Winnell for 3 months, driving him around. And, that is a really worthwhile, I think it was really worthwhile. It's not so much that you learn hard skills in terms of, I'm going to steal that, I'm going to steal that. It's more that you get a full sense of the expectations and you understand the scope of what a feature project is to a director and I guess the endurance that's required and to what extent. The pressures as well from studio level or just producers. Those kinds of things I felt were really helpful and I think mentally prepared me for making that first feature because I had already seen it kind of secondhand.
So looking back now on your journey to that first feature, do you think it proceeded at just the right pace, or looking back, do you think there are things now that could have maybe sped it up a little bit if you'd done something differently?
It's hard to say, I think. I think to a certain degree, I have friends as well who've had really successful shorts and then have very consciously made the decision to make more shorts because they feel they want to explore more ideas and they want to hone their skill before, making that first feature. And I think it really depends, because there's so many ways to make that first film. And some people take the approach of just going for the first opportunity and kind of going, look, it's a learning curve. I'm going to learn on the job, and it might not be your passion project even. It's more just like taking the opportunity that you're presented with. And then other people kind of wait years and years for that first project, and it's the thing that they've been developing for 10 years. So I don't think there's like a proper way to do it, and there's pros and cons to both. You can certainly do it earlier, I think, if you just take those opportunities rather than waiting and making sure you're prepared. But the truth is, I don't think you're ever going to feel 100% prepared, and you kind of just have to keep going. And what's really important probably is just making sure you surround yourself with good people. And, in my case, I met my Australian producers who've been on Relic since the conception of it. I met them when I was like 21, and they approached me out of my film school. And, I want to share a story because I think it's important to say that, they approached me and they were saying, kind of like, oh, what are your feature ideas? We loved your short. What have you got? And I had nothing, coming out of film school. You're just like, I'm just so glad to have made it through, and you're burnt out. But I basically like winged it and lied to them and said, oh yeah, I've got this great idea. I'll send it to you. I wrote something in 2 weeks, and they very respectfully passed on that project, which makes total sense. Like, but I kept in touch with them. And then 4 years later, that's when I started writing Relic, and they jumped on board that project. So again, it's more about the relationships that you cultivate over time and having those people who can guide you in making that first feature, because they had a history of working with first-time directors, and it's a world of difference having that kind of support. So yeah, all this to say, I don't think there's ever a point where you feel 100% ready, because it feels so insurmountable at the start. But I think you'll find that once you get on set, it's not so different from what you've been doing with your short films. It's just on a larger scale and a longer scale. But, and also, I'm going into other areas now, but the great thing about a feature, and hopefully having that kind of infrastructure around you in terms of producers and line managers, obviously depends on the size of it. But in a short film, you're like, I don't know about you guys, but I was always at least co-producing, doing location scouting, doing some of the production design elements as well, just doing what you can because it's your baby, right? You put everything into it, sometimes catering, like staying up till all hours of the evening. And then it's like a sprint because you're trying to make the most of the gear hire. So you're doing like crazy days and you're just trying to get it done. It's really that labor of love. Whereas there's a little bit of that with features, but it's much more respectable because you have to fit it within your hours and there's people to take care of stuff like catering for you. Like you just don't even have to think about that at all. So yeah, it sounds crazy, but it's kind of nice just to focus on the directing in a way that you can't do with a short film. You're just too across a lot.
Was it tough for you to give up any of the control? Obviously not of catering, but were there areas where you're like, I don't know, maybe I still want to really do that? Or were you comfortable just going, let's give you all of these tasks and I'm just going to focus on this one?
I think that's a real key part of directing, right? Delegation. Like you have to be able to delegate. Otherwise you kind of shoot yourself in the foot because you're not, I think there's a way to achieve a balance where the buck stops with you ultimately in terms of like the creative vision. And I feel like I learned early on with shorts that there can be a danger in trusting too much and kind of going, oh yeah, they'll take care of it and, not double checking. But conversely, I think it's a missed opportunity to hold your cards too close because it really is about the collaborations with your heads of department that can push your ideas further. And there's some pretty amazing things that can arise out of that. So, I think one of the dangers that first-time directors face sometimes is, I don't feel like I experience this as much, but my producers were telling me some of the directors they've worked with before, have this feeling about needing all the answers or needing to have all the answers. And that can be quite dangerous because if you get stuck, you have no one to help you, and these things can be worked out with a group of people. That's why you've hired them, they're your team. So if you kind of create an island around yourself and think, oh no, I'm the director, I'm the dictator, I'm the creative genius who has everything worked out. It's like you're gonna come up against some shit. So you might as well have like your team around you and establish that kind of collaborative environment early.
So once you started shooting Relic, how much did the finished product change from the story that you went in with? Was there a lot of collaboration from start to finish?
I think it's more about it's like different approaches to achieving what you want. So it's not so much that your story changes or your intention changes in any way. It's more about being open to other avenues. And I would say it was pretty similar from our shooting script to the end result. There were some things that were cut in the edit, for example. I mean, the edit just feels like you're just fixing all the mistakes you made on the day sometimes. But there was only like one scene that we rewrote during the production, and that was a dialogue kind of rewrite, nothing substantial to the plot. So nothing I can point to. Like more in the scripting process, that the script changed drastically, even though the intention was still the same. So, I mean, I think a lot of your job as the director is to keep the train on its tracks and just to know really clearly what the destination is, and taking on ideas for more logistical problem solving, but really having a clear idea of what the ripple effects are going to be for the rest of the film.
It felt like the theme of both films, the short and the feature, is something very personal to you. Is that right?
No, definitely. My grandmother had Alzheimer's, so I was definitely drawing on a lot of that experience and used that as the inspiration for the story.
I wanted to ask whether, I don't know if intimidated is the right word, but this cast was amazing, and Emily Mortimer is such a stunning performer. I feel like I would be intimidated to talk to Emily Mortimer, let alone tell her what to do. Did you have that at all, or were you just like, this is my gig, that's your gig, let's just do this?
No, of course you have all sorts of anxieties about working with a very experienced cast as a first timer. I think, again, one of the things that, and in some ways I feel really lucky that they were really generous with me and just very open and always trusted me from the get-go. I think the worst thing would be to feel like you have an actor who's like resisting you or doesn't quite trust you, or that there's nothing that kills your confidence more than like your leads not being on side. But I mean, part of it I think is just in pre-production and the preparation for it, just really establishing that trust beforehand. So it's not like there's enough going on set that you kind of want to have that closeness with your actors as much as you can prior to shooting. And for us, that looked like a lot of discussion and being really open with each other about our, I suppose, life experiences. Bella called it trauma bonding, but it's kind of a way to almost create like a language of how you can talk about what the characters are going through on set. So by really sharing your lives with each other and finding the common ground and where you connect as people, I think that can be a really useful kind of starting point, for your relationship with your actors. And I mean, certainly in terms of feeling intimidated, I feel like to a certain degree you start to put that side of things. Like if you step back, maybe things feel a bit surreal. You're like, oh, Emily Mortimer is like in my, I'm just having coffee with her. That's great. But I think, you can kind of split that part of your brain. Yeah, you quickly get used to it.
One of the things that struck us when we were talking about Relic, we've seen many other movies about dementia, about Alzheimer's. It seemed like this one was trying to present a different side and showing maybe the more unpleasant nature of how bad it can get compared with some of the other more recent movies on the subject that we've seen. Is that something that was in your mind?
Yeah, I guess as a horror film, it lends itself to, that really scary harrowing side of the disease. And I guess my focus is more on the heightened grief and heartbreak kind of aspect of the experience, as opposed to the day-to-day kind of mundane and the, sometimes the levity that can come from people who've got Alzheimer's, I suppose. If I think about my own grandmother's experience, she had Alzheimer's for about 10 years, and we're really condensing this down into like a week max. So it's a very heightened, I guess, depiction of the experience and kind of taking it to this supernatural extreme. But I would say that there are a lot of like uncanny, surreal moments in being with a loved one who has Alzheimer's. Like I remember my grandmother being convinced that there was someone, like a man, sitting in her closet. So like there are moments like that actually, are drawn from real life, and you're just kind of pushing it to the highest extreme. But I think for me, in terms of like intention, it was never to demonize, people with the disease at all. Of course not. It's more about the emotional connection and the importance of that in the face of these really scary things. And yeah, I think, even the fact that you see the story from Edna's perspective at key points, you really do build like a compassion for her. And I guess that was kind of a driving factor as well.
Well, Jason, we don't want to hog this all night. Were there questions that we should toss at her from the group?
Yeah, why don't we have one right now, which is asking about gaffing lighting, Natalie. The question is, Dave asked, first of all, he said it's Relic's beautifully shot, which it is. Wondering what the ratio was of scenes lit only with available or practical.
Yeah, we actually had a combination of things like set-wise. So we had 2 locations and 1 studio build that was like the upstairs rooms. So of course, all the upstairs rooms were, there are a lot of lights coming in through the windows, most of them using practicals as well. Maybe natural light, maybe like 30% natural light and practicals. So overall, there was some, I think it was a naturalistic approach, but we definitely had lights up.
One of the other things that impressed me is in Relic, even though the metaphor is not, it doesn't hit you over the head. I mean, it's clear, but it's not something that just weighs on you, that you found that balance between making clear what you're saying without condescending to the audience, I think. And a lot of times that's a tough line to toe in an effective manner. So I guess, was that something in your writing or in your shooting? Did you ever get to a point where you think, maybe I'm pushing a little too hard, maybe I pull back a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. I guess I'm a fan of ambiguity in some ways, and it is really interesting hearing reactions to Relic. Some people think it's too heavy-handed, some people think it's like too confusing. So I guess it's all relative anyway. But yeah, I think there's something really lost when you have to parse out the mechanics of like supernatural logic. Like I think there's something about having to describe the logic of supernatural mold, essentially, that makes the whole thing quite naff. And I'm more of a fan of things making emotional sense in a way. And if there's like a lyrical kind of logic to it, then that's sometimes enough for me, unless there's something like glaring. But I would say in general, I found it interesting in post, just going off of feedback from producers, that usually the American producers were very like, things need to be more clear, like we need more, clarity. And then the Australian producers were like, no, pull it back, like, this is too overt. So I guess as the director, you only have your instincts as your compass. So hopefully it was the right choice.
2020 has been a really, obviously, incredibly weird year for films distribution and how people are seeing them. And 2 things that struck me with Relic. One is that I think the first 3 really good genre films I saw this year, Relic, Amulet, and Shirley, all were directed by women, which I thought was outstanding. And then also I wondered whether the fact that people were really trying to find something online that was worth watching, whether you think that benefited your film at all.
Probably. I would guess that we got more, at least press attention because there was less coming out. And I remember IFC Midnight released it in the US, and they said very early on, okay, we're going to make the most of this gap that the studio films being pushed back is going to create. And I remember feeling a little bit sad about that because I think you always have this like romanticization of a theatrical release and having everyone see it in the darkness of the cinema. But in the end, yeah, I think more people probably saw the film because of that. And certainly in Australia, I mean, we were in lockdown during that period, and that we were bought out by a streaming service here called Stan. And they had a very aggressive marketing campaign that kind of just took over Australia. And so 100%, I think way more people saw it over there than they would have if it was in theaters. So yeah, there are good things to come out of the constraints as well.
Will there be more short films in your future, or are you going to keep with features or more proof of concepts, or what are you thinking?
I think I like the idea of creating more short form projects, but probably not a short film to the scale of something like Creswick again. I would probably just focus on, writing the features and getting those up. Yeah. I mean, I think it's always great to play around with new ideas, but it's also you have to weigh the benefits as well. Maybe music videos or branded content, stuff like that.
Actually, it's an interesting what you bring up about writing your own content, because I was curious whether at this point you might want to just branch out and direct something from somebody else, just sort of hire on to do like a big studio film, or would you just rather have the control of writing what you work on?
Probably a bit of both. I definitely want to focus on my own work and, be writing, directing, and kind of creating my own stuff. But at the moment, yeah, I'm definitely reading a lot that's, other people's kind of writing. And I think it's tricky. Like, it's really hard to balance the two things to a certain degree. Like, another person's script has to like appeal to you just as much as your own kind of work, I suppose. So I think I'm like sorting through that at the moment, but I'm definitely open to both.
Jason, do we have any other questions you've seen come in?
We do. I think you guys might get to hear Milo talking upstairs a little bit. So Tova asked, how early on, Natalie, did you come to the idea of this cluttered attic as the right visual metaphor? And then talk about, like, was that difficult in terms of production design?
Very early. In fact, I think it was the first image that, I'm so sorry, there's like a construction site across the road from me that's suddenly started up. It was actually the first image that probably came to me for Relics. So my grandmother's house had this upstairs section, like a couple of rooms that were full of hoarded junk, but also like family, mementos and furniture. And her hoarding had gotten worse over the years as well. And I kind of made the leap that maybe part of it was driven by the notion of like trying to hold on to things when everything was kind of slipping away. And I liked the idea of a space kind of filled with that compulsion, but also being almost emblematic of the mind and memories, and the idea of it growing inwards into the house. Very House of Leaves, which is, one of my favorite books as well. And yeah, so I would say, one of the kind of seminal images of the film. And achieving it was tricky because we were like 40% over budget on the set design. So we had to kind of, take a red pen to the designs, and it was a much bigger space initially. But in the end, my production designer made this, I guess you could call it a modular set. So sections that could be taken away and, make it feel like a different kind of part of the set, even though in reality it was like two hallways. So those were certainly some creative challenges that we came up against. And for me, it was really important that the space never felt like you were entering an alternative reality or like a universe, that it wasn't that Narnia moment of like, oh, where are we? It was more like a slow descent into this kind of fractured space. And so we used a lot of the same architectural language as the rest of the house as a starting point.
We have a few more chat questions. Hope and George, do you want to take those, or should I read those? Okay. Lon is wondering about how you got your actors, Natalie. So he's wondering, did you have them in mind, or was it all through auditions? Did the producers attach them? How did the talent come about?
No, I didn't actually have specific actors in mind while writing it. So it was more about having creative conversations in the casting process and trying to figure out, what's the type, who's the ideal, and what combinations of actors are going to work well, because of course they have to be a family as well. And so, yeah, it wasn't an audition process at all. That was the one thing, quite a new thing for me. With working with high profile actors, it's more just settling on the person you think is best and kind of making that imaginative leap from their previous roles. And I think meeting them as well was a massive thing, just being able to meet them in person and see what they're like and get their ideas about the script and also their personal experience with grief in particular. And meeting all three of them, it was like, yeah, just it felt right from that first meeting. So yeah.
We've got one here from Jordan. He says he's an Aussie living and working in New York, and he wonders if you can talk a little about working with Film Victoria and how you went about working with them.
Yeah, so Film Victoria is our state funding body, and they were the ones who funded that program I mentioned where I was able to shadow Lee Winnell on Upgrade for 3 months. So Film Victoria were great. They also gave us some development money as well. So I think we did 2 rounds of development with them to write a few drafts of the script. And then they also put in money for the final production investment as well. So yeah, they were great. I mean, in terms of, I have to say the Australian funding bodies are so chill when it comes to giving feedback and approvals and stuff like that. I remember in one of our kind of fine cut screenings, we probably got 2 notes from Film Victoria, and then we got 6 pages of notes from our US partners. And the contrast was just oh my God. But yeah, they were great.
And one from Meg. She recently won funds to make a proof of concept for a horror feature. Congratulations. She'd love to know, what was the most important thing you learned from shooting the proof of concept that you used in making the feature?
This is a little outside of, I think, what you're asking specifically, but I wanted to share as well that I've since made another proof of concept for a new project. And I think it's really wise to have your feature script before you make the proof of concept, because in this other project, I made the short film first and then wrote the feature. And it's not that they're still linked, but I think I could have written a better short that encapsulates the feature and what it's about a bit better. So just some advice. But I think, yeah, I mean, you learn from every project you do. So with the short, I think it was playing around with the divide between prosthetics and visual effects. That was a really key thing for me. And just to get some experience in that, because it wasn't something I'd worked on before. So I think that was really useful. Experiments in tone and sound design as well, and atmosphere, those kinds of things you can really explore.
As an American watching Australian horror movies, I get the idea that if I go there, I'm not going to come home alive. Is that true?
Is this like the animals are going to kill you kind of vibe, or just the isolation, or
that it's just a scary place?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, yeah, historically there's a lot of murderers killing backpackers or whatever. Yeah. No, Australia's fine, no worries. Just stay in the cities and you'll be fine.
Sean says, you mentioned changes that happened in the script. So Sean and Roy both wanted to ask about changes that you may have needed to make for budget reasons.
Yeah, good question. Nothing so interesting. Maybe sometimes can we set this at this location instead and kind of minimize our locations potentially? But it wasn't too bad. It was more, I don't think we had to make any overt, it was relatively contained anyway to start with. So again, it was more the scope of that set build that we really had to bring down. Those were the main budget limitations, but it didn't really affect the script too much.
So what do you, when you watch horror movies, what's most effective to you? What scares you?
I guess it's always the anticipation of something, and your mind conjuring something that isn't there. That's always seems to be scarier than, actually seeing the menace and the monster. I think that's always a thing. I'm really into like cosmic horror and the mystery of something and like something unexplainable. I think that's quite chilling. Probably the supernatural or the paranormal is scarier to me than like, a slasher film.
Are you thinking about continuing to work in the genre, or are you going to branch out?
Yes, I am. Yeah, I'm writing a few things that are all in the horror genre. One of them is like a folk horror. So subsets of the genre. But my tastes kind of are broader. I'd love to do some like sci-fi, even magical realism if it's not, like a social realist drama. I'm probably interested.
I think, Jason, did we miss any of these?
Just one, and it occurs to me, people could probably ask their own questions and unmute. So Rachel, if you're still on, why don't you unmute and ask Natalie your question yourself?
My question was, what was your biggest challenge in or obstacle going from short to a feature? Like, what was maybe the most intimidating part for you to do that step, which is, I think, it's a big step.
Yeah, sure. I think one of the intimidating things was I'm a huge planner. And so with my short films, I really like to not necessarily storyboard, but at least shot list and plan and really have a sense of how it's all going to cut together, and have a plan A, but also like a B and C as well. Whereas I found with a feature that it is much harder to do that across the entire film. Like, it wasn't that we were completely unplanned, but we certainly storyboarded a lot of the action and stunt prosthetic sequences. But I found that you had to ride the chaos a little bit, and that sometimes that was really stressful, but also that it can be quite freeing as well to kind of learn to trust your instincts a bit more. And you will find as well that you sometimes come up with better ideas, in the moment than you do what you plan for. I still think it's good to prepare for sure, but I think you get better at rolling with the punches a bit and thinking on your feet, and really quickly adapting. So that was probably the biggest lesson for me. So sometimes it was coming to set an hour early and then coming up with new ideas that could fix whatever obstacle had come up. So you learn to work within the time constraints.
Ride the chaos. You should trademark that. That's great.
Well, I think we're at time, Hope and George. So if you want to wrap us, I think we're ready.
Well, thank you so much, Natalie, for talking to us today, for our woman from the future, for joining us today. We love this movie so much, and we're super excited to see the next thing that you make.
No problem. Thanks for having me, guys. Fun to chat.
So thanks again to Natalie and Jason and everybody at Nightmares Film Festival. It was a kick to finally get a chance to do a podcast. That was a lot of fun. And we look ahead to the next Fright Club, and we're going to talk about voices.
That's right. It's kind of dedicated to you, honey.
Uh-huh.
It's one where, because, in some movies, it is the voice that does so much of the creepitude, and so we wanted to just really celebrate some of those voices next time.
Did you just invent a new word?
I did.
I like it. Creepitude. So we're looking forward to that. In the meantime, let us know what you thought about this. Thought it was some great insight from Natalie James. And what you thought about her movie, too. If you haven't seen Relic, please look it up. Really, really good stuff.
It's one of the really inexpensive rentals right now, so watch it.
Yeah, so watch it and let us know. You can always find us, keep the conversation going on Twitter, at Fright Club Pod. That's us. Also on Facebook and Instagram, it's Mad Wolf Columbus, and the main website, of course, you can find us, all of our written reviews and fun stuff at madwolf.com. So until next time, she is Hope Madden.
He's George Wolf.
And this is the Fright Club Podcast.
Hello, darling. This is Elvira, Mistress of the Dark. And stay frightful, my friends.